Hey, hey, hey. Welcome back, my friend. It's Alex here, and this is English in Fluency, the place where we sit down together, relax a little, and quietly turn your English into something that actually works when real people are talking to you at real speed. And today, I want to start with a tiny experiment. I want you to imagine you're standing in a train station and someone next to you says, "If the next train is late again, I'm just going to take a taxi." Now, quick question for you. Did that person already take a taxi? No. Are they definitely going to take one? Also no. So what actually happened in that sentence? Somebody opened a door into a situation that hasn't happened yet, a situation that might happen, and they told you exactly what they would do if it did. That, my friend, is a hypothetical. And today's whole episode is built around learning to hear that door opening in real time while someone is speaking to you without needing to stop them, rewind them, or beg them to slow down. Here's why this matters so much, and I want to be honest with you about it. A huge number of English learners can read a conditional sentence just fine on a page. Give someone a worksheet with if sentences printed on it, nice and clear, black text on white paper, and they'll get it right 9 times out of 10. But put that same person in a real conversation, where the words are flying by, where the speaker's voice goes up and down, where there's no comma printed in the air to tell you where one idea ends and another begins, and suddenly it all turns into a blur. You catch a few words, you catch if, maybe you catch then, but you completely miss what the person is actually planning, hoping, warning about, or imagining. And that's a real problem because hypothetical language is everywhere in daily English. It's in advice, it's in warnings, it's in dreams people share with you, it's in negotiations, it's in small talk about the weather, and it's in the most emotional conversations of someone's life. So by the end of today, you are going to be able to catch that shift in a speaker's voice, that little signal that says, we are now talking about something imagined, not something real. And you're going to follow the whole idea from the condition all the way to the result, smoothly, calmly, like you've been doing it for years. Before we go further, let me tell you what's coming in this episode, because I always like to be honest with you about the shape of things. We're going to follow a story. It's a story about two people, a woman named Mira and her older brother named Theo, and a decision that's sitting right in the middle of their family, like a stone nobody wants to move. Through their conversation, you're going to hear real, natural hypothetical English, the kind people actually use, not the textbook kind. I'm going to stop the story every so often, not to ruin the moment, but to point something out to you, the way a friend might nudge your arm and whisper, "Hey, did you catch that?" And at certain points, I'm going to ask you to guess what comes next, to finish a sentence in your head, or to notice a word before I explain it. That's not me testing you to make you feel bad. That's me training your ear the same way you'd train a muscle, a little bit at a time, with real use, not just theory. And by the way, if you're the kind of learner who likes to press pause and repeat things, this episode is built for exactly that. Nobody's rushing you today. So let's start gently with the basic shape of a hypothetical sentence in spoken English. Because before you can catch it fast, you need to know what you're listening for. In its simplest form, a hypothetical sentence has two halves. One half sets up the imagined situation, and the other half tells you what would happen because of it. In writing, we usually connect these two halves with the word if. If it rains tomorrow, we'll stay home. Simple enough on paper. But here's the thing about real speech. The thing nobody tells you clearly enough. The word if is often not the loudest word in the sentence, and it's definitely not the only signal. Speakers use their voice, their pacing, and other small words to warn you that a hypothetical is coming, sometimes even before the word if arrives. Learning to hear those early warning signs is honestly more useful than just waiting to hear if. Because in fast conversation, people often use other words entirely. Words like suppose, imagine, say, what if, unless, otherwise, and in that case. We'll meet every single one of these today through the story, the natural way, not through a boring list. All right, let's step into the story now. Picture a small kitchen, late evening. The kind of light that comes from just one lamp because nobody's bothered to turn on the big light yet. Mira is sitting at the table with a laptop open in front of her, and her brother Theo is leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, the way people stand when they're trying to look calm, but aren't quite managing it. Their mother has been offered a spot in a care home closer to Mira's apartment, but it means selling the family house, the house both of them grew up in. Nothing has been decided yet. Everything is still hanging in the air, which is exactly the kind of situation where hypothetical language comes rushing in, because when nothing is decided, all anyone can do is imagine. Theo speaks first, and his voice is careful, testing the water. Okay, so, say we sell the house. Where does that actually leave Mom? Financially? I mean, in the long run? Now pause with me right there for 1 second. Did you catch that opening word, say? In this sentence, say doesn't mean to speak. It's being used exactly like suppose or imagine. Theo is inviting Mira into an imagined situation, a situation where the house has already been sold, even though it hasn't. This is one of those natural spoken shortcuts that textbooks barely mention, but real English speakers use constantly, especially when they're thinking out loud, testing an idea gently before committing to it. So from now on, whenever you hear someone start a sentence with say, followed by a situation, followed by a question or a result, train your brain to treat it exactly like if. Say you lost your job tomorrow. What would you do first? Same structure, same function, just a more casual, conversational flavor. Mira answers slowly, choosing her words. If we sell it at the price the agent mentioned, she'd have enough for at least the first 2 years at that place, maybe longer if we're careful with it. Now here, we get a full, clean example, the kind you'll recognize from grammar books, but listen to how natural it sounds in her mouth. If we sell it, she'd have enough. Notice that little sound, she'd, which is actually she would, squeezed together. This is something I really want you to lock into your ear today, because it trips up so many learners. In spoken English, would almost never stands alone and clear the way it does in a textbook. It gets pulled into the person before it, into a tight little sound. She'd, he'd, I'd, we'd, they'd. If you're listening for a clear separate word, would, you might miss it completely, because in fast speech, it often shrinks down to something closer to a soft D sound stuck onto the end of a pronoun. So here's a small practice moment for you. Right now, no pressure, just try it quietly in your head, or even out loud if you're somewhere you can. Say this sentence slowly first. If I had more time, I would travel more. Now say it fast, the way a real person actually would. If I had more time, I'd travel more. Feel that shrink? That's exactly the sound you need to train your ear to catch. Because once you can hear I'd, she'd, we'd clearly, half the difficulty of spoken hypotheticals disappears. Back in the kitchen, Theo isn't fully convinced yet, and you can hear the doubt creeping into his voice. Yeah, but what if the market drops? Houses aren't selling that fast around here anymore, not like they were a few years back. And there it is, one of the most common hypothetical openers in all of spoken English. What if? Notice something interesting about this one. Theo doesn't finish the sentence with a full result clause here. He just says, what if the market drops, and lets the worry hang in the air, trusting that Mira will understand the unspoken danger without him spelling it out. This happens constantly in real conversation. People don't always complete the grammatical structure the way a textbook would want them to. Sometimes the hypothetical condition alone is enough to carry the whole emotional weight of the sentence, because the listener fills in the rest based on context and shared understanding. So here's something important for your listening skills. Don't wait for a perfectly complete if-then sentence every single time. Sometimes the if half arrives, hangs there, heavy with meaning, and that's the entire message. Your job as a listener is to feel the weight of that unfinished condition, not to demand a textbook perfect ending that real speech doesn't always give you. Mira responds to this unfinished worry with a very natural piece of hedging language. Well, if it drops, it drops. We can't really control that part. But even in a slower market, that house would still get some interest. It's in a decent area. Here, listen closely to that phrase, if it drops, it drops. This kind of repeated structure, where the same short clause appears on both sides, is a lovely, very natural way that English speakers accept an uncertain hypothetical without pretending to have all the answers. It basically means, if that unfortunate thing happens, we'll deal with it when it happens. There's no use worrying about it now. You'll hear this pattern a lot in casual English. If it happens, it happens. If he comes, he comes. If she likes it, she likes it. It's a small structure, but once you recognize it, it tells you a huge amount about the speaker's emotional state, usually a kind of tired acceptance, or someone trying to stay calm about something outside their control. Let's pause the story here for a moment, because I want to give you a proper listening practice moment, the kind where you actually do a little work, instead of just hearing me talk. I'm going to say a short hypothetical sentence, and I want you to notice, just notice, whether the if clause comes first or second in the sentence, because in real speech, it genuinely can go either way, and native speakers switch between the two orders constantly depending on what they want to emphasize. Here's the first one. We'd have to rent a bigger van if we're taking all of Mom's furniture too. Did you catch it? The result came first this time. We'd have to rent a bigger van. And the condition came second. If we're taking all of Mom's furniture too. This matters for your listening, because if you're always expecting the condition first, you might get confused when a speaker flips the order, especially mid-sentence, especially when they're thinking as they talk, the way real people do, not the way scripted textbook dialogues do. Now, back to the kitchen. and things start to shift a little emotionally. Theo sits down across from Mira, finally, and his voice softens. Can I be honest with you for a second? If we do this, if we actually sell it, I don't think I'm ready. Even if it's the right decision. Even if it's the smart decision. Now here, notice something beautiful and very human about spoken hypothetical language. Repetition for emphasis. Theo says, if we do this, and then immediately restates it. If we actually sell it, almost like he's circling the idea, unable to just say it once and move on. Then he uses even if twice in a row, a phrase that signals something slightly different from a plain if. Even if tells the listener that no matter whether the condition is true or not, the result stays the same, usually an emotional result rather than a practical one. Even if it's the right decision, I'm not ready, means his readiness has nothing to do with logic. The decision could be perfectly correct, and he'd still feel this way. This is such an important pattern to catch in real conversation, because even if often shows up exactly at the emotional center of what someone is trying to say, right when they're being the most honest. Mira doesn't answer right away. There's a pause here in the story. A real pause, the kind that happens in genuine conversations far more often than language learning audio usually admits. Silence is part of listening too, by the way. Don't panic when a speaker goes quiet. That's not a technical failure of your ears. That's just how humans talk, especially about hard things. When she finally speaks, her voice has changed, gotten smaller. I know. Honestly, if it were up to just feelings, I'd never sell it either. I still remember Dad teaching us to ride bikes in that driveway. Now, catch this phrase very carefully. If it were up to just feelings. This is a slightly more advanced hypothetical structure, sometimes called the unreal conditional, where the situation being described isn't just uncertain, it's actually contrary to reality, imagined for the sake of comparison. The decision isn't only up to feelings, there are financial and practical factors too. So Mira is imagining an alternate world where feelings alone decide, just to admit something true about her heart. Listen also to that little grammar detail, if it were, not if it was. In careful, slightly formal spoken English, especially when someone is being reflective or a bit poetic, you'll still hear were used with it or I in these unreal hypotheticals, even though plenty of casual speakers now say was instead. Both are common in real life, so train your ear for either one. Don't let a was, where a textbook told you to expect were, throw you off balance. Let's take another small pause together, because I want to give you a chance to practice completing an idea, the way you'd need to in a real conversation if you were half listening and had to guess the ending based on tone and context. I'm going to give you the first half of a sentence, and I want you to imagine, based on everything we've built so far in this story, what kind of ending would fit naturally. Here it is. If Mom moves in closer to the city. Now, think about it for just a second before I continue. What kind of result would fit here, given everything we know about this family? Maybe something like, we'd be able to visit her more often, or she wouldn't be so lonely, or it would be easier to help her with appointments. Any of those would fit beautifully, because that's exactly how listening comprehension works in real life. You're not just catching individual words, you're using the whole emotional shape of the conversation to predict where a sentence is heading. And that prediction skill is honestly one of the most powerful tools you can build as a language learner. Now let's go back into the kitchen one more time, because the conversation takes a turn here that introduces a new hypothetical signal word, one we haven't met yet today. Unless. Theo rubs his face and says, "Look, unless we find some other way to help her. Financially, I don't see another option here. Do you?" Unless works a little differently from if, and it's worth slowing down on because it quietly confuses a lot of learners. Unless we find some other way basically means if we don't find some other way. It's a negative condition hiding inside a positive-sounding word. Many learners hear unless, and their brain tries to process it exactly like if, forgetting to flip the meaning. And that tiny mistake can completely reverse your understanding of a sentence. So here's a useful trick for your ear. Every time you hear unless, quietly translate it in your head to if not, just for a second, just to check your understanding. Unless we find another way becomes if we don't find another way. Unless he calls first becomes if he doesn't call first. Do this enough times while listening to real conversations, and eventually it becomes automatic, and you won't need to translate it consciously at all. Mira thinks about this for a moment, and then offers a thought that brings in yet another signal phrase. What about this? Suppose we don't sell the whole house. Suppose we just rent it out instead, and use that money to help with her care. Would that even cover enough? Here we meet suppose again, functioning exactly the way say did earlier, and exactly the way imagine often does too. All three of these words, say, suppose, and imagine, are casual, spoken English cousins of if, and they're incredibly common in real brainstorming conversations, exactly the kind of conversation happening in this kitchen right now. When people are trying out new ideas together, thinking through options out loud, they reach for these words constantly, because they feel gentler and more exploratory than a flat, formal if. So build this list in your mind and really let it settle in. If, say, suppose, imagine. What if? All doing very similar jobs, all opening the same kind of imaginary door, just with slightly different emotional colors. If is neutral and standard. Say and suppose feel like gentle brainstorming. What if often carries a little worry or excitement behind it, depending on tone. Theo considers the renting idea seriously, and his response brings in our next important structure. That could actually work, but only if we can find reliable tenants fast. Otherwise, we're paying 2 sets of bills for who knows how long. Here we get 2 useful pieces at once. First, only if, which tightens a condition, making it feel stricter and more essential than a plain if. Only if we can find reliable tenants fast tells you that this entire plan depends completely on that one condition being met, no wiggle room. Second, we get otherwise, a word that often appears right after a hypothetical statement, summarizing what happens in the opposite case. Otherwise, we're paying 2 sets of bills basically means, if we don't find tenants fast, we'll be paying 2 sets of bills. Otherwise is one of those wonderful little words that lets a speaker avoid repeating the whole conditional structure again. Instead of saying, if we don't find tenants fast, we'll have to pay double, they just say, otherwise, and trust you, the listener, to connect it back to what was just said. This is exactly the kind of listening skill we're building today. Not just catching individual conditional sentences, but tracking how ideas connect across several sentences in a row, the way they really do in natural conversation. Let's do one more little listening practice moment before we continue the story, because I think this one will really click for you. I want you to listen to this short exchange and pay attention only to the word otherwise, and try to figure out what situation it's replacing. Here it is. We should probably call the bank this week. Otherwise, we'll lose the good interest rate they offered us. Pause and think. What is otherwise standing in for here? It's replacing something like, if we don't call the bank this week? See how much shorter and more natural that makes the whole exchange sound? Real English speakers do this constantly, trimming down repeated conditional structures into single connecting words like otherwise. And once you're comfortable spotting this pattern, entire conversations become dramatically easier to follow because you're not lost every time someone shortens their sentence instead of repeating the full structure. Now, let's return to Mira and Theo, because their conversation is about to reach its emotional center. The part of the story where all these grammar patterns we've been studying suddenly carry real weight instead of just being examples. Mira closes her laptop slowly, and when she speaks again, her voice is quieter than before. Can I tell you something? If Dad were still here, I think he'd tell us to stop overthinking this so much. He always said a house is just walls and a roof. He'd probably say Mom matters more than the driveway we learn to ride bikes on. This sentence is a beautiful, natural example of an unreal hypothetical about the past and an imagined present combined together. The kind of layered thinking real people do constantly when they're grieving or remembering someone. If Dad were still here, imagines a situation that isn't true, he's gone. And he'd tell us, imagines what he would say in that impossible situation. Notice again that soft, he'd sound, easy to miss if your ear isn't trained for it, but absolutely central to understanding the emotional meaning of the sentence. This is why we spent time earlier training your ear specifically on that shrunken would sound, because moments exactly like this one, quiet, emotional, meaningful moments, are often delivered in fast, soft, contracted speech, not slow, clear, textbook speech. Life doesn't slow down for our grammar lessons, so we have to train our ears to keep up with life as it actually sounds. Theo goes quiet for a second, and then laughs a little, the kind of laugh that has some sadness mixed into it. Yeah, he probably would have said something exactly like that, actually. Listen to would've here, another contracted form, this time would have, squeezed down into something that almost sounds like woulda, in very fast, casual speech. This is a slightly different structure from what we heard before. Theo isn't imagining a present hypothetical anymore. He's imagining a hypothetical about the past, agreeing with what his sister just said their father would have done, if he were still alive to say it. In real conversations, these different time layers, present hypotheticals and past hypotheticals, get mixed together constantly, especially when people are talking about memory, regret, or family history. Don't worry about labeling them perfectly in the moment. Just train your ear to notice the contracted sounds. Would've, could've, should've. Because catching those sounds tells you immediately that you're inside hypothetical territory, even before you've fully processed the rest of the sentence. Mira reaches across the table and takes her brother's hand for a second, and the whole scene softens. Okay, here's what I think we should do. Let's not decide tonight. If we're both still feeling good about the renting idea by the weekend, we call an agent Monday and figure out numbers properly. If either of us has doubts, we table it for now and talk to Mom directly about what she actually wants. Because honestly, that's probably the conversation we should have had first, anyway. This is a lovely, clean example of parallel hypothetical structures used to lay out a plan, something you'll hear constantly in real decision-making conversations, whether it's a family talking about a house, co-workers planning a project, or friends deciding on a trip. If we're both still feeling good, we call an agent. If either of us has doubts, we table it. Two clear conditions, two clear results, set up back to back, giving the listener a simple map of exactly what will happen under each possible situation. When you hear this pattern in real life, someone laying out 2 or 3 parallel if statements in a row, that's usually a sign the speaker is trying to organize a decision clearly for everyone listening, almost like they're thinking out loud in an organized way. Recognizing this pattern helps you follow group decisions, meetings, and planning conversations far more easily. Because you know to expect a small set of connected hypothetical branches rather than one single stray sentence. Theo nods slowly, and there's real relief in his voice now. Yeah, that sounds fair. And hey, if it helps, I could come with you when you talk to her. Might make it easier, having both of us there. Mira smiles, actually smiles, for what feels like the first time in this whole conversation. That would help a lot, actually. Thank you. And there, gently, without any big dramatic ending, the scene settles. The tension in the kitchen easing the way tension does in real families, not with a perfect resolution, but with the plan, a next step, and a little more warmth between two people than there was 15 minutes earlier. Now, let's step back out of the story completely for a moment, because I want to gather everything we just heard and organize it clearly in your mind. The way a good teacher walks you back through a lesson before sending you off to practice on your own. Today, inside one single kitchen conversation, we heard an enormous range of natural hypothetical signals, far more than most textbooks ever show you in one place. We heard plain if clauses, both with the condition first and with the condition second, because real speakers constantly flip that order depending on what they want to stress. We heard say and suppose used casually to open brainstorming ideas, feeling much softer and more conversational than a flat if. We heard what if carrying worry, sometimes left deliberately unfinished, trusting the listener to feel the danger without a full explanation. We heard even if, showing up exactly at the emotional core of the conversation, telling us that a result stays true no matter what. We heard unless, a tricky little word that secretly means if not, and needs a quick mental flip every single time you hear it. We heard only if, tightening a condition into something essential, and otherwise, quietly replacing an entire repeated conditional clause with one short, efficient word. We heard unreal hypotheticals about both the present and the past. If it were up to feelings, if Dad were still here, he would have said, each one carrying real emotional weight, each one delivered in soft, contracted, very human speech, rather than slow, clear, robotic speech. And finally, we heard parallel hypothetical structures used to organize a plan. 2 or 3 conditions laid out clearly, one after another, the exact pattern you'll hear in meetings, family discussions, and everyday decision-making all over the English-speaking world. There's one more piece of this puzzle I haven't mentioned yet, and it might actually be the most important one of all. Even more important than any single word we've covered so far. And that's intonation, the music of the voice, the way it rises and falls as someone speaks. Here's something fascinating about hypothetical English that most textbooks never really explain properly. Speakers very often lift their pitch slightly on the if clause, almost like they're leaving a question hanging in the air, some unfinished business, and then let their pitch drop and settle on the result clause, as if closing a small door once the idea is complete. Go back in your memory to Mira's sentence. If we sell it at the price the agent mentioned, she'd have enough for at least the first 2 years. If you could see that sentence drawn as a line on a page, it would probably rise gently through the first half. If we sell it at the price the agent mentioned, almost floating, uncertain, and then come down more firmly on she'd have enough, landing, settling, becoming solid. This rising and falling pattern is a real, physical, audible signal that a hypothetical sentence is happening, often even before your brain has consciously processed a single word of vocabulary. Your ear, believe it or not, can learn to catch this melody before it catches the meaning. The same way you might recognize a friend's mood from their tone of voice on the phone before you've even understood what they said. Try this small experiment with me right now, purely with your own voice, wherever you are. Say this sentence out loud, and really let your voice rise on the first half and settle on the second. If it rains tomorrow, we'll just stay inside and watch a movie. Feel that shape? That gentle lift? That settling drop? Now here's the useful part for real listening comprehension. Once your own mouth and ear have practiced that shape a few times, you start recognizing it automatically in other people's speech, even in fast, messy, real conversations where individual words blur together. You might miss half the vocabulary in a sentence, especially early on in your learning journey, and that's completely normal. That happens to every learner, in every language, at every stage. But if you catch that particular musical shape, rising, then settling, your brain can still flag the sentence correctly as a hypothetical, buying you valuable time to catch up on the actual words a half-second later, the way experienced listeners do almost without noticing they're doing it. Let's bring this back into our story world for just a moment longer with one small bonus scene, because I think a bit of variety will help all these patterns settle even more naturally in your mind. A few days after the visit to Odette's house, Mira meets her close friend Priya for coffee, mostly just to breathe after an emotionally heavy week, and the conversation drifts, the way good coffee conversations do, from family stuff into something completely different. Priya's own dilemma about whether to change careers. Honestly, Priya says, stirring her cup slowly, if I actually quit and went back to school for design, I think I'd be terrified for about a year, and then probably really happy after that. Mira laughs and leans forward. What if you didn't wait until you felt ready, though? Because honestly, unless something forces your hand, you might just keep waiting forever, the way people do. Priya considers this, turning her cup in a slow circle. Yeah, that's fair. Suppose I just picked a start date, like an actual real date on the calendar. Would that make it feel more real to you, if I told you a date? And Mira nods, smiling. It would. Also, if it helps at all, I'd come to your graduation thing, whenever that ends up happening. I mean that. Notice how naturally this whole exchange between two friends, completely separate from the family house storyline, still uses nearly the same collection of signal words we've been trainin' all episode. If, what if, unless, suppose, I'd. That's not a coincidence built for a lesson. That's simply how English speakers everywhere, in every kind of relationship, every kind of conversation, reach for these same tools again and again whenever the future feels uncertain and worth talking through out loud with someone they trust. Here's a small challenge for you now, and I really do want you to try this. Not just nod along and forget about it 5 minutes from now. Sometime in the next day or two, put on any English audio you enjoy. A show, a video, a podcast, doesn't matter what. And just for a few minutes, don't try to understand everything. Just listen specifically for these small hypothetical signals we practiced today. Listen for the shrunken I'd, she'd, we'd sounds. Listen for unless, and quickly flip it in your head to if not. Listen for otherwise, and ask yourself what full sentence it's secretly replacing. You don't need to catch every single word around it. Just catch the signal, notice it, let your brain register, ah, this is a hypothetical, and let that small moment of recognition build, little by little, every single day, until it becomes something your ear does automatically, without any conscious effort at all. That's genuinely how fluency gets built. Not through one big breakthrough, but through hundreds of small, repeated moments of recognition stacked up over time until they turn into instinct. I also want to give you one more little practice exercise before we wrap up today. Something you can do purely in your head, right now, no audio needed. I'm going to describe 3 short situations, and for each one, I want you to try building your own hypothetical sentence out loud, using any of the signal words we covered today. If, unless, what if, suppose, even if, whichever feels natural to you. Ready? Situation 1. Your friend is deciding whether to accept a job offer in another country. Try building a sentence about that, using a hypothetical structure. Situation 2. It might rain during a picnic you're planning this weekend. Build a hypothetical sentence about that too. And situation 3, a slightly more emotional one. Imagine someone you love could hear your thoughts right now. What would you want them to know? Try to shape that into a sentence using an unreal hypothetical, the kind we heard when Mira talked about her father. Don't worry about being perfect. The goal here isn't grammar perfection. It's comfort. It's fluency. It's getting your mouth and your brain used to building these structures naturally, the same way Mira and Theo did, without ever once thinking about grammar rules while they spoke. Because for native speakers, this structure isn't a rule they memorized. It's just how thinking out loud naturally sounds. Now, I did promise you we'd stay with this story a little longer, because there's more to it, and honestly, more hypothetical English worth pulling apart together. So let's jump forward to the weekend Mira mentioned, the deadline they set for themselves. It's Saturday morning now, bright light coming through a different window this time, Mira's small apartment instead of the family kitchen, and her phone rings. It's Theo, and you can hear right away that something in his voice has shifted since that quiet night at the table. Hey, so, I've been thinking about this non-stop, and I think I'm actually good with the renting plan. If the numbers work out the way you calculated, I really don't see a reason to wait. Notice how naturally he's using almost the exact structure we studied earlier: condition first, result second, no hesitation, no forced grammar, just a person thinking out loud the way people genuinely do when they've made peace with a decision overnight. Mira sounds relieved, and a little surprised, too. Really? Okay, that's actually a relief, because I was worried you'd still be on the fence about it. What changed? And Theo gives an answer that brings back one of our signal words from earlier, this time used slightly differently. Honestly? I talked to my partner about it last night, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, unless we actually try the renting option first, we'll always wonder if we gave up on the house too fast. And she's right. I don't want to look back in 5 years and regret not even trying. Listen again to that. Unless doing exactly the job we trained your ear for earlier, secretly meaning if we don't. Unless we actually try means if we don't actually try, we'll always wonder. See how quickly that mental flip becomes useful in a completely new sentence, with completely new characters and a completely different emotional tone than before. That's exactly the kind of flexible, repeatable listening skill we're building today, not memorizing one single sentence, but training a habit that works across any conversation you'll ever hear. Mira laughs softly, and there's real warmth in it now. Okay, well, tell her I said thank you, because that's a good way to put it. All right, let's call the agent Monday like we said. And if she thinks renting is realistic given the condition of the house, we move forward with it properly. If she raises any red flags we haven't thought of, we regroup and figure out Plan B together. No pressure, no rushing. Again, notice that clean parallel structure. 2 conditions, 2 results, laid out calmly, almost like Mira is thinking through a small decision tree out loud for both of their benefit. This kind of layered, parallel hypothetical planning shows up constantly in real English conversations, whenever 2 or more people are organizing next steps together. And now that you've heard it twice in this story, in 2 different emotional moments, I want you to start listening for it everywhere. Meetings at work, friends planning a trip, even couples deciding where to eat dinner. If it's open, we'll go there. If it's closed, we'll just pick something nearby. Same structure. Endlessly reusable. Incredibly common. There's a pause on the phone, and then Theo brings up something new. Something a little more delicate. There's one more thing, though. What if Mom doesn't actually want to move at all? We've been so focused on the money side of things, we sort of skipped over just asking her properly. And there's that what if again, carrying worry the way it did earlier in the kitchen, except this time the worry has shifted. No longer about money, but about a person's feelings, about whether their whole plan even matches what their mother actually wants for herself. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it shows you something important about hypothetical language in real life. The same signal word, what if, can appear again and again throughout a single relationship or a single decision. But the weight behind it changes as the situation develops. Early on, what if carried financial anxiety. Now, later in the story, that exact same little phrase carries something softer and more human. A worry about honoring someone else's wishes. Your ear needs to catch not just the word itself, but the emotional context wrapped around it. And the only way to build that skill is through exposure to real, evolving conversations exactly like this one. Mira goes quiet for a moment, clearly turning this over in her mind. You're right. Okay, here's an idea. What if we go see her together this afternoon, not to tell her anything, just to ask her honestly what she actually wants? If she loves the idea of moving closer to us, that makes everything easier. And if she doesn't, if she'd rather stay near her friends and her church and everything familiar, then maybe renting isn't even the right question yet. Maybe we need to think completely differently. This whole stretch is a wonderful, natural example of hypothetical thinking used not to plan logistics, but to genuinely consider someone else's perspective before making a decision that affects their entire life. Listen again for that soft she'd sound tucked inside "she'd rather stay." Easy to miss if you're not specifically listening for it, but carrying real meaning once you catch it. This is, honestly, one of the most emotionally mature uses of hypothetical English you'll ever hear. Using an imagined situation not to protect yourself, but to genuinely imagine someone else's inner world before acting. That afternoon, in the story, Mira and Theo do exactly that. They visit their mother, whose name is Odette, in her small, familiar living room filled with photographs and the smell of something baking. And the conversation there brings a beautifully gentle end to everything we've been building toward all episode. Odette listens to both of her children carefully, the way mothers often do, patiently, without rushing to answer. Then she says, quite simply, "You know, if you two are asking because you're worried about me being lonely out there in that big house alone, I appreciate that more than you know. But if it were entirely up to me, and I know it isn't just up to me, I think I'd actually love being closer to you both. I miss seeing you casually, not just on holidays." Notice, once more, that unreal hypothetical structure, "if it were entirely up to me," echoing almost exactly the phrase Mira used earlier about her father. If it were up to just feelings. This kind of quiet grammatical echo, the same structure returning at a meaningful moment near the end of a story, isn't an accident in natural spoken English. People often unconsciously return to a phrase or structure that carries emotional weight for them. And once you start noticing these echoes, entire conversations start to feel more connected, more musical almost, rather than just a random string of separate sentences. Theo smiles, clearly relieved beyond words, and says something simple, but warm. "Well, that settles it then. If that's genuinely what you want, Mom, then we'll make it happen. And honestly, it'll be nice having you close by again." And Mira, quietly, adds one last small hypothetical of her own, gentle and hopeful. "If we get the place near mine sorted out in time, you could even be there before the weather turns cold. Wouldn't that be nice, having someone drop by with soup on a Sunday?" And Odette laughs, actually laughs, the warm, easy kind, and the whole little scene settles into something calm and hopeful. No big dramatic music, no perfect neat ending, just three people who talked honestly, used a lot of if and unless and what if along the way, and ended up somewhere better than where they started, which, if you think about it, is basically what hypothetical language is for in real life. Not predicting the future perfectly, but exploring it together, out loud, with the people we care about. Let's slow down one final time before we wrap everything up. Because I want to leave you with one more focused practice moment, slightly different from the ones earlier, something a bit more challenging, since your ear has had a whole episode now to warm up. I'm going to read a slightly longer stretch of natural speech, similar in style to what we just heard from Odette, and I want you to try, just try, to count in your head how many separate hypothetical signals you can catch without writing anything down, just counting quietly as you listen. Here it is. If it were up to me alone, I'd probably just stay put. But that's not fair to either of you, is it? Suppose I moved closer and hated it. Well, at least I'd have tried. And if I hated staying here forever, wondering what if, that seems worse somehow. Unless one of you tells me honestly you'd rather I stayed, I think my mind's actually made up. Take a moment and count. Did you catch, if it were up to me? Suppose I moved. If I hated staying? What if? And unless one of you tells me. That's 5 separate hypothetical signals inside just a few sentences, spoken the way a real, thoughtful person actually talks when they're working through a decision out loud, layering idea on top of idea. If you caught even 2 or 3 of those on a first listen, that's genuinely excellent. And if you caught all 5, that tells me your ear has grown remarkably sharp over the course of just one episode together, which is exactly the kind of progress I love celebrating with you. There's actually one more layer to this I want to walk you through, because it's something a lot of intermediate learners never quite get comfortable with. And that's how hypothetical language shifts slightly, depending on how sure or unsure the speaker feels about the situation actually happening. Think back to Theo's very first sentence in this whole story. If we sell the house, spoken as a real, open possibility, something that genuinely might happen. Compare that to Odette's later sentence, if it were entirely up to me, describing something that isn't really true, since the decision was never entirely up to her alone. English speakers shift their grammar slightly to signal this difference, using simple present tense forms for open, likely possibilities. If we sell, if she moves, and shifting into past tense forms, even though they're talking about now, for situations that are imagined, unlikely, or simply untrue. If it were, if I had, if he knew. This shift feels strange at first if your own language doesn't work this way, but here's some good news for your listening skills specifically. You don't actually need to produce this shift perfectly yourself to understand it while listening. Once you know this pattern exists, your brain will start automatically sorting sentences into "this is a real possibility" versus "this is imagined or untrue," just based on which tense the speaker reaches for, almost like a quiet signal running underneath the words, telling you how seriously to take the condition being described. Let me give you one more small, gentle practice exercise built around exactly this distinction, because I think hearing it laid out clearly, back to back, really helps it click. Listen to these 2 sentences and notice how different they feel, even though they're structurally similar. First, if Theo finishes the paperwork this week, they'll list the house by Friday. That's a real, open possibility, spoken about something that genuinely might happen very soon. Now, the second one. If Theo had more free time this year, he'd probably handle all the paperwork himself. That's an imagined situation, gently suggesting that, in reality, he doesn't have that much free time right now. Same basic shape on the surface, condition plus result, but completely different emotional and factual weight underneath. Once your ear learns to feel that difference automatically, without translating anything consciously, you'll find yourself understanding not just what someone is saying, but how confident they actually feel about it, which honestly is a huge part of real communication that goes far beyond simple grammar. Before I let you go today, I want to say something a little more personal, because I think it matters. Learning to understand hypothetical English isn't just a grammar skill, even though that's how it gets taught in most classrooms. It's actually a way of understanding how people process uncertainty, how they dream, how they worry, how they make plans, and how they comfort each other when life feels heavy, the way it did for Mira and Theo tonight in that quiet kitchen. Every single time you catch a hypothetical signal in real conversation, you're not just understanding grammar, you're understanding a person, their hopes, their fears, their half-formed ideas, before those ideas even become decisions. That's a beautiful thing to be able to do in a second language, and you're clearly putting in the work to get there. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be listening to me right now, all the way to this point in the episode. So here's what I want you to do next. If this episode helped your ear catch something it's never caught before, even one small thing, even just that soft "I'd" sound, or that sneaky little "unless," then do me a favor and hit subscribe on English in Fluency, because we build episodes exactly like this one every single week. Real stories, real emotional conversations, real natural spoken English, broken down gently so your ear can actually catch up to real native speed. And if you have a moment, drop a comment and tell me one sentence, just one, using any of today's hypothetical patterns. If, unless, suppose, even if, anything at all. I read every single comment, and honestly, I love seeing what you all build, because it tells me your ear is growing, one small sentence at a time. Share this episode with a friend who's also working on their English, someone who might be sitting in their own kitchen tonight, quietly wishing they could follow fast conversations a little more easily. And most of all, be patient and kind with yourself as you practice this. Nobody catches every hypothetical signal on the first try, not even close. And that's completely fine. What matters is that you keep showing up, keep listening, keep noticing a little more each time. I'll see you in the next episode, right here on English in Fluency. Until then, take care of yourself and keep listening closely, because there's always more waiting quietly underneath the words. Bye for now.